Cool. So today's presentation is navigating your tech career. So hopefully everybody's in the right place. Good to see you back there. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, that's good. All right, we'll kick it off. So my name is Sean Feeney. I work at Nerdery, as you just saw on the logo. I did my undergraduate at a place called Rose-Hulman Institute of Technology. It's in Terre Haute, Indiana. Probably nobody in here has heard of it. It is allegedly the #1 ranked undergraduate engineering college in the country. Allegedly. I definitely believe that, otherwise I would not have went there. But we have marketing issues to work on for sure. One of the things that was really popular when I went to school, so I did my undergraduate in software engineering because web design, web development was not really an option back then, not even digital arts. Literally like 2 years after I started college, other colleges started offering like digital arts and applied programs like that. I would have totally went that route, but it wasn't available to me at the time. So I went the software engineering route, which is slightly different than computer science in that it adds in software project management, software QA, all these other aspects of the software delivery process that are often overlooked by just classes and algorithms and compilers. So you're probably familiar with like the PMBOK, PM body of knowledge. There's this thing called the SWBOK, that came out from IEEE. So I went in my junior year. I should have waited till my senior year. But the link went out, I signed up for it, and I went my junior year and got the CSDA certification from IEEE, which is the entry-level associate cert for the SWBOK that was really popular at that time. I went and looked it up. You cannot get CSDA or CSDP certified anymore, but allegedly IEEE will still, like it was a perpetual thing, so I can still say I have it, but new people can't go get it, which is super weird. I went back after several years in industry and got my MBA. I started at Indiana University with their Kelly Direct Online program. I switched careers. When I switched careers, my employer no longer offered tuition reimbursement. So I looked around and figured out who would accept most of the Kelly credits, and the answer was Wright State University in Dayton, Ohio, even though I lived down in Cincinnati. They had a campus near Cincinnati that I was able to go to nights and weekends and wrap up my MBA. That also doesn't exist anymore. Now you have to go all the way up to Dayton for that. I have 5 AWS certifications. So that's all the associate and professional certs. I have several accreditations there as well. And then I just went to Google Next, I think it's 2 months ago now, and got my first GCP certification as well. So before we talk about just general, career paths in technology and alternative career paths to web design, web development, I wanted to walk through my career path just so you have a context of what I'm talking about. So I'm going to start in 2002. I was a fresh-faced high schooler back then, and I lucked out that there was a vocational campus available to me. And so I took Cisco networking classes there. So that would be the CCNA certification courses that you can go through. It's a 2-year program. So I started that in 2002 and immediately had a job with the school district, which is really awesome. So I worked summers and I worked part-time, full-time in the summers, part-time during the school year. I was, prior to that, the webmaster, back when webmaster was still a thing. I was the webmaster for my middle school. And so did this, and then the guy who was, the teacher who was in charge of picking the webmaster for the high school was also doing the CCNA courses. So then I became webmaster of the high school after some seniors graduated. So that was kind of me getting started in web development, getting started in server stuff. So the local electric utility had donated servers to the high school because it's tax benefited that way if they do that instead of just trashing it. So they made that donation and it came to our course, and the instructor said, hey, if you guys can fix it up, that's your new web server. And so that's what I did. I went about trying to learn Linux at the time. It didn't quite work out. Back in 2002, 2003, Linux was not quite as user-friendly. So it did wind up being on a Windows platform at the time. The language that a lot of the website was written in when I started was Perl, if anybody remembers Perl. That was fun back then. By the time I graduated, it was in PHP, though. I definitely rewrote that entire thing, put a CMS in front of it, And the reason I knew how to do that is because I had, in my junior year of high school, had went to a program that Channel 1 News had offered. They're not around anymore, and I don't know if any of you were in high school back then when it was around, but essentially they would pick some 15 to 20 students from across the nation and fly them all out to Los Angeles or Hollywood. They're like right on the border, so you could say either way. And you got to do the job of somebody in that production news outfit for a week. So it was called Student Produced Week, and I was the webmaster for that year. So that was exciting, and that's where I learned about CMSs. That's where I upskilled some of my Photoshop skills, and I loved it. So I came back that after my junior year, so the summer in between junior and senior year, totally rewrote that high school website, got it to the point where the instructor was like, it's so advanced, nobody else can do it. So he was actually he was no longer happy with that work. So I actually left that co-op job with him, went to a little place called the Geek Squad. You guys have Best Buy headquartered here. I lived in Kentucky at the time, so this was just in the store as an agent. But it was the same thing, right? I'd learned those skills fixing up PCs over the years, fixed up that server at the school district, learned about networking through the CCNA program. So Geek Squad was a great fit, so I did that throughout senior year and the summer after senior year of high school. Went to college. As I said, I went to Rose-Hulman, which is the far side of Indiana, Terre Haute, Indiana, from where I grew up in Kentucky. And summer after freshman year, I immediately had an offer to go to Sony DADC. The DADC no longer stands for anything, even though it looks like an acronym. It used to stand for Digital Audio Disc Corporation. This is where they made CDs, and eventually now they make Blu-rays there. So I did a co-op and as a sysadmin there. Loved it, loved the team I was working with, really upskilled my Linux skills, right? I'd dabbled in Linux to that point, but now I was an actual Red Hat Linux administrator. Got to touch IBM AIX, which is an old Unix platform, so got to learn some Corn Shell. I don't know why you would ever need to know that nowadays, but I had exposure to it, and then continued along the Windows path as well there. So I graduated eventually, kept doing that co-op throughout, did some study abroad and other things. And then I graduated right into the Great Recession that everybody here probably remembers. It really was not that long ago. So I was right at the peak of the Great Recession. I had 2 offers coming out of college. Ultimately, I chose the one that was back in my hometown with a little technology consultancy called Logic Technology. And they had essentially one customer. That customer was GE. So I spent a year out of college at GE doing a infrastructure security engagement. It was titled infrastructure, but we didn't actually do that much infrastructure work other than we were touching infrastructure. But as you all know, when you do any kind of software, you always touch infrastructure. So it was actually a remediation project for a certain Air Force contract that they had, where we were going around and documenting the user permissions on every file share regardless of underlying technology platform. So we had Windows people, Linux people, NetApp people, all sorts of different platforms. And then I actually got to build in C#.NET, which I had never done prior to that, but my software engineering education certainly prepared me to very quickly pick that up and build a system that essentially the customer could go in, view all that data that we were collecting via scripting and other mechanisms, and then also the remediation teams, which was also us, could go in and as they fix things, report on progress of those remediations, and then of course when the automation scanner went against it next time, it would see that, hey, this has actually been fixed. So that was my first year out of college, still not doing web design, but sort of, right? C#.NET, it was at least a web app for sure. Had a phone call from my coworker at Sony DADC, and you'll notice that I'm going kind of up and down here in terms of, this used to be a popular thing that we used to do at Accenture a while ago. But you'll see I considered it a high when I worked at Sony the first time. When I come back full-time, post-graduation, the reason I was able to get in there was actually one of the mentors there, the guy who was in charge of the Unix environment, actually passed away, and he passed away on the job. So I consider it a little bit of a low point that's how I got back in there, but I absolutely loved the team that I worked with there. So I took the job. They relocated me from Cincinnati back to Terre Haute, and worked there for a couple years. After a couple years, I was mentioning about digital audio disc, right, manufacturing. You might have noticed streaming is really popular now, and Sony kind of missed the boat on the whole streaming thing. So the president of the company came in, and I just happened to be appointed to represent IT at this meeting. I don't know why. I was like the youngest guy in the department. Just nobody else wanted to go, so they sent me. And I got to hear the message from the president of the company that, hey, we're not going out of business tomorrow, but we don't really see a path forward for printed media beyond 2021. So you might want to start dusting off the resume, which is a really impactful thing for a president of a company to do. That way you're prepared and have time to consider your options, and that's certainly what I did as a relatively young guy, not totally attached. I did not own a home in Terre Haute, for example. I was able to immediately start my job hunt, so I dusted it off a little bit quicker and went to eventually Accenture. Accenture hired me. Accenture is a Big Five consultancy. They used to be known as Arthur Andersen back in the day, and then the whole Enron thing happened, and somehow the technology guys at Accenture were smart enough to spin off like a couple years prior. I don't know if somebody had like some kind of knowledge about that coming or something, but they were very smart. They spun off, they rebranded as Accenture, and they survived while Arthur Andersen went down in flames. So I joined a practice there called Data Center Rationalization, and the stated mission of that practice was to go help companies rationalize, right? Should I have something or should I not have something? In this case, their data center as well as their application portfolio. So should I have this? If I keep it, what should it look like, right? Should I offshore it? Should I go to a colo? It was slightly on the cusp of cloud. So when I joined the practice, cloud wasn't really a serious consideration for enterprises. So it was mainly true on-prem data centers that I was working with at the time. And most of the engagements I got staffed on were all around the actual migration work. So instead of the strategic, we're going to have this conversation and figure out, build a business case to do X, Y, and Z. It was really, somebody's made a decision, and now we need help executing. So that's the first part of my career at Accenture was doing the execution, the planning, the managing the offshore resources, managing of the onshore resources, training of other people as they onboard it to these very, very large projects that Accenture has. Very exciting stuff. Learned a lot throughout that. Learned so much that in Cincinnati, which is where I had relocated back to for Accenture, was actually their North American delivery center. So whenever I would travel with Accenture to whatever city that the project was in, they would be like, isn't there like a delivery center in Cincinnati? And I'm always like, I guess, I don't know. I've never actually been to the Cincinnati office because I either work from home or work directly at a client site, not in Cincinnati. So eventually I did start going to some networking opportunities there at the Cincinnati office. And I would always ask the people that were actually staffed at that office, like, what do you do? Like, what is this delivery center? Why is it here? And eventually that networking led me to a job in that delivery center. So I joined. I don't think the title initially was Private Cloud Architect. It was something along the lines of continuous improvement, which was a really popular term at the time. But ultimately, I fell in with a team that was quasi-related to that North American Delivery Center, and we were doing Oracle Private Cloud. Accenture was a really big Oracle partner, still is to this day, and Accenture had a thing called the Accenture Accenture Private Cloud Platform that they were trying to sell at the time, which you could argue there's 5 tenets of cloud. I have a whole other presentation I presented a few weeks ago on that. You could argue whether or not that private cloud was truly cloud, but it was there. Accenture was offering it, and we specifically had control over the sales for that Oracle portion of the workloads that would land into that private cloud. So I really enjoyed that. It got me into this idea of offerings development. How do you package an offering? How do you market it? How do you position it in front of a customer? So I really worked on my client-facing skills while I was at Accenture. And then, I was wanting to get my MBA nights and weekends. I started when I was at Sony, finished up when I was at Accenture, and then I got a call from Amazon Web Services. Amazon being one of those big FANG companies we all hear about. Nobody turns down a call from them unless you read the what was it, not Washington Post, but probably New York Times article that came out some years ago about people crying at their desk and whatnot up in Seattle. I didn't read the article, so I took the call, and it worked out for the best, right? Amazon and Amazon Web Services are actually essentially two different things. Yeah, the financials roll up from one to the other, but they're independently operated. And come to find, as you learn more about Amazon's business model, all the teams are independently operated, have independent P&Ls that they manage. So it's essentially a conglomeration of many, many different startups, and that's a really interesting way to run a company at that size. So the reason I got that call was Amazon Web Services wanted to move into the Midwest market, specifically the Cincinnati market. And at Accenture, I had taken advantage of all the training opportunities that had went across the entire org, right? Because you get these emails that often are not dedicated to your team, but anybody could take them up on that offer. We do the same thing at Nerdery, right? We have a lot of cloud certifications we want people to get. I don't care if you're in the development org or the operations org or wherever you fit. I just need Nerdery people to be certified. So Accenture had that same challenge, went through some Red Hat trainings, EMC trainings, and ultimately an Amazon training that they shipped me out to Seattle. It was relatively new at the time. Shipped me out to Seattle for the training. I didn't even have the cert, but just the fact that I went to the training was enough to have Amazon give me a call when they entered the Cincinnati market and realized there's only about 5 to 10 people that know anything about Amazon in Cincinnati, and I just lucked out to be one of them, because I took advantage of that training opportunity at my current company. So I'll take that as a transition point here. So I went to Amazon. I joined their professional services group around AWS. So it was very similar to what I was doing at Accenture. They would ship me out. This one was a little bit more regional. So instead of New York City, not to say I didn't go to New York City for Amazon, but instead of regularly being up in that Northeast corridor, I was generally in what they called the Great Lakes region, so Ohio, Michigan, Illinois, Kentucky, probably some others nowadays. So I really enjoyed that, minus the travel. Travel always gets you eventually as you get older and start raising a family and that kind of stuff. So I did look around eventually, and Target is the reason I currently live here in Minneapolis. They gave me a call because they were trying to just snipe people from Amazon, right? Amazon being a competitor of Target rebranding a couple of years ago as a digital-first company. So they gave me a call, and it didn't matter that I was in AWS Professional Services. It said Amazon, so they brought me on as a lead DevOps engineer. We're going to talk about DevOps in a minute, but if any of you are familiar with the concept of DevOps, it should never ever be a title. So the idea that they're hiring this position of lead DevOps engineer tells you they kind of don't know what they're talking about. And it's not a dig at Target. Target knows very much what they're talking about now, but at the time, they were very much experimenting and bringing in new people to change the culture of technology at Target to match the new rebranding. So I loved my time at Target, loved my coworkers there as well, but had another opportunity materialize last October. It brings us to 2018. So I went and joined Nerdery down in Bloomington as their cloud engineering practice director. And this was a strategic thing that I had always wanted to do. I would still be at Target otherwise. But the idea of building a cloud consulting practice from scratch really excited me, and I've had a great time ever since joining Nerdery. But you never know what is in the future. I'm actually relocating to Phoenix right now with Nerdery, so you never know what's going to come down your career path. So on that topic, I want to talk about some broad trends that you will see or may already be seeing affecting your IT career. And this is applicable regardless of whether you're a web dev, you want to get into ops, you want to do both, you want to be a DevOps person. Please don't have the DevOps title though. If you see the title, run in the other direction. But definitely you should see it in the description of the roles. So the first trend that you probably are familiar with is every business now wants to be a digital business. I was just talking about my time at Target wanting to rebrand as a digital business, being known for that, and having a lot of success towards that, right? It used to be they were another brick and mortar retailer, and then very rapidly in the last couple of years, you've seen them come out with the mobile ordering, and you can drive to the store, they'll bring it out to you. They've partnered with Ship to do the, bring stuff to home. So there's a lot of stuff that can happen once a business truly understands that it is a digital business and it is 2019. If the company has not figured that out yet, you might want to start looking for other opportunities. Go to a company that gets that, because Accenture was saying that all the way back in 2013, and the idea certainly predates that. You can go all the way back to like Clayton Christensen, which I quote here from Innovator's Dilemma, disrupt or be disrupted. And that's really where's the disruption happening nowadays? Technology, websites, mobile apps. That's where the disruption is right now. The good example is Microsoft. You might remember Microsoft back in the Bill Gates days. He did not want to get involved with open source. And then when you had Steve Ballmer running Microsoft, he did not want to get involved with cloud. But in both cases, there was a strong underlying current of leaders at the company that stuck around after the tenure of those leaders and were able to make those things a fundamental part of the business. So by the time Satya came on board and changed the overall market messaging of Microsoft to much fanfare and success, that foundation was already there, and Microsoft was able to just accelerate that new path that they were on because they understood that they needed to be a digital services business instead of shipping software out the door on this thing called printed media. Another broad trend is software is eating the world, right? This is Mark Anderson from way back in 2011 saying that, and he does have an updated article out there. But I'm going to take this towards the infrastructure side, right? So I think all of you in the audience today kind of come from that software background. And really software is eating the rest of the business, right? It's started by eating the different lines of business, and now it's truly eating this thing called IT or operations or whatever it's branded at your company. So if you looked at Werner Vogels, who is the CTO of Amazon, you have to stop wasting time and effort for things that do not matter for your customer. One of those things is your infrastructure. It's not a differentiator, right? There are 3 major cloud players today in order of market share: AWS, Microsoft, and Google. And all of them offer you this opportunity to treat infrastructure as a non-event, as a thing that you can have just as large and just as capable hardware at your disposal as those giants, just at the click of a button or at the beck and call of your CLI command. So if you're not one of those companies, you probably shouldn't have a physical data center. So again, one of those red flags to look for in your career. Are you still running stuff in a closet in the corner or with the little colo down the street? They should have some kind of cloud strategy. Otherwise, again, you might want to start brushing off that resume. Another one here that I'm probably going to get burned for later because I think they're recording this and put it on YouTube is Rackspace is dead. And when I say that, I mean co-location is dead. Rackspace is very much alive. They're alive because they're changing their business model, again, to realize that they are a services company, not just a server, rack company. So I encourage you, as you look at your website deploys, not to think in terms of hosting, but to think in terms of the actual business benefits that software, that website is delivering to the business. And think of servers themselves as inherently unreliable. So you want to use several of them. I know a lot of companies just want to cost cut and use the absolute cheapest option. Don't let them. Say the cheapest option. Truly help them understand that the cheapest option is some kind of highly available architecture. So in that case, a load balancer is absolute must in front of your website for many different reasons. But in this case, to average that load over multiple servers so that one of them dies, all those connections go on to the other server. So there's lots of things that I'm not going to dive into much here, but you do need to be considerate of how do I externalize those stateful components of my website or my CMS to some kind of managed service from that cloud provider. So the question I would pose to all of you, just to think about, you don't have to yell in response, is if you can never SSH into your Drupal server again, how would that change how you interact with it? There's something to keep in mind and noodle on and go read some blog posts and write some blog posts when you come up with an answer. Another trend out there, some of you might be able to read the webcomic on the right-hand side there, some of you can't, but this idea of like full stack developers, right? So we have these short overlapping life cycles of technologies, and it's becoming ever shorter. So it really drives a need for lifelong learning in your career. So instead of like one specialty, we used to have like Oracle DBAs was a real big thing for many, many years. But now the smallest specialty is like a domain. So you need to be like all relational databases, all non-relational or NoSQL databases. Like you have to really get comfortable with not just one technology, but multiple technologies in a certain space. So full stack developer is how a lot of companies kind of look at that. Again, hopefully that's not a job title. Hopefully it's just a thing that, hey, we want people who are comfortable with multiple technologies, and that should be something in the role. There's another meme out there called It's the Future. Some of you have probably read those articles where it's like going through all the different JavaScript frameworks that have come out recently. There's a couple versions of that. There's some DevOps versions or Docker versions or whatever, but the JavaScript one really nailed it on the head and started the meme out there. Another thing to consider is that a lot of companies have transformation efforts. A lot of those efforts fail. And the general statistic you see out there is 70% of all transformation efforts fail. And it's generally attributed to John Cotter, who I studied my MBA program. Turns out that stat's made up. He has written an article that is out there like, he sourced it from this other material, and turns out that other material kind of made that figure up. So it's closer to 1 in 10 transformation projects fail. The rest of them are sort of a success. So right, a company will set some kind of large transformation effort, and they will reach some number of milestones. They generally don't hit all of them, and then they move on to the next one. So this is why it's disrupting your career, because one quarter they're saying this is the most important thing, and then the next quarter, oh yeah, never mind that, we need to move on to this next thing. And the cycles behind that is just getting faster and faster and faster. So one of the questions, again, just noodle it over, right? Could change fatigue really be contributing in turnover? If you see that happening in your company, and then you see a lot of your coworkers leaving, is it because they're constantly being asked to do things that are completely different from what they had traditionally been doing? Obviously, there's a need for lifelong learning, so you need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. But when this happens daily, weekly, every sprint, it could be a problem for sure. A little bit lighthearted here. Some of you might be familiar with the I Am Developer Parody account out on Twitter. You might see this in job postings nowadays. We're looking for a junior developer with the experience of a senior developer for the salary of an intern. I'm sure none of you have ever run into that in your careers, right? And then there's lots of fun comments there. Turns out I've been using this slide since before I worked at Nerdery. Tim Van Fossen actually works at Nerdery. I had no idea, but he added to some of that, right? Full stack with UX and mentoring experience. You'll also be doing third-tier customer support, and then there's a whole bunch of other awesome things there. Feel free to go back and grab the recording of this. Apparently it'll be on YouTube, and you can read through that or just Google that account. I highly recommend you follow it just for the laughs. Another broad trend, this will be the last trend we talk about, is DevOps. I talked a little bit about it. A lot of companies, right, they're just slapping it out there. I have a transition slide somewhere. We'll show you in a minute. I'll get to it. So let's just talk about what is DevOps, or what should DevOps be. It's really the 3 Ps, right? People, process, and platforms. So the way Amazon would communicate it is it's all about the culture of your company, plus the practices that they put in place, as well as then the tools, right? A lot of companies really get mired in the tooling behind DevOps, and a lot of people actually conflate the terms DevOps and CI/CD. Like, oh, you say DevOps, you just mean continuous integration, continuous deployment, or continuous delivery. Again, there's another argument about that terminology. But that's not what DevOps is. If you miss the culture and the practices and you immediately just jump into the tools, you could get lost. Your company will spend a lot of money, and it probably won't get the benefits that DevOps could really bring. So some of those benefits, right? Every company wants to reduce time to market, reduce maintenance, reduce costs, reduce downtime, while simultaneously increasing security, scalability, global reach, and a number of other things. So you will often, again, this is why DevOps is often a misused term, they think it fixes everything, and there is no magic fix, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, so how do our enterprises try to navigate this environment, right, with DevOps and Agile and everything else out there? And the answer is they usually kind of fail at it. So the first failure mode that you'll see out of them is fake Agile. There's a good article and a book apparently coming out from Steve Denning on this. So summarizing some of his thoughts about fake Agile. There's Agile in name only. So me summarizing that, so I'm not putting words in his mouth, but for me, when I see Agile in name only, I think of ceremonies for the sake of ceremonies, right? There's this really big stand-up culture with Agile, but if you're having stand-ups for the sake of stand-ups and nothing is actually being communicated of value in them, does it make sense to have those daily stand-ups? A lot of people argue you can't have Agile without stand-ups or daily stand-ups. They're probably wrong, right? They're thinking of capital A Agile versus lowercase Agile. Another failure mode there is they continue all legacy processes, adding one or more sprinkles of Agile and pretending that transformation happened. You saw this at Target when Target first went along this Agile transformation, that it was very, very painful because they tried to do the big bang, right? We're going to go to Agile, we're also going to go to the product model, and everybody just needs to fit this. So you saw a lot of teams that weren't even software engineering teams trying to just apply Agile. So like these legacy infrastructure teams who would start doing these daily stand-ups, and like everybody there was working tickets, right? So there was already a communication of things in progress and flight being requested, etc. So they were really just trying to adapt this ticketing process to Agile, and then wondering why they were just wasting everybody's time with all these ceremonies. So don't do that. If you're going to do Agile, roll it out a little bit at a time, and in a way that really benefits the teams themselves as opposed to management. Another way is that you do it for software only, and when you do it for software only, you will probably run into some kind of stall scenario. So one way that I consider this a failure is if you don't move towards DevOps, but you do go Agile, right? So like I said, operations can take many different names at companies. Development usually does have just the name development, but if you say development, you're going to go 10x the speed of every other part of the business. You're going to just move the constraint, right? If it used to be the constraint was really long development release cycles, and then you change those release cycles to weekly, daily, hourly if you're a FANG company, and the rest of the company then becomes a problem, right? Because maybe there's approvals before something goes live. Maybe I need somebody to physically go touch a server because I'm still running them in a closet down the hall. Those things will become very immediate as an impact when you move Agile just for software only, and it will inevitably create friction that the company will have to deal with. So the quote from Steve is, "Agile and bureaucracy are mutually incompatible. In the medium term, only one of those things can survive." Obviously, as developers, we want Agile to be the one that survives, not bureaucracy. And then there's capital A Agile. We differentiate this at Nerdery as any of the frameworks that you see out there, a scaled Agile framework, etc. Anything that came out of like Deloitte or some other large consultancy is like a form of capital A Agile, and they've probably got trademarks and copyrights and all that all over it. These kind of things get bought by management, and it helps them have the illusion that they're maintaining control when that's completely opposite to what Agile is about. Agile is about enabling your grassroots developers to do things in a lean or agile way, right? It all comes out of that lean manufacturing process stuff that Toyota came up with long, long ago. So Agile requires professionals to succeed, and no amount of frameworking is going to get past that requirement. If you really just have people who are not professional, do not do the work that is assigned to them, you can layer on all of these frameworks you want, and it's not going to solve that underlying problem. And I love this tweet here from John Cutler. Look at the SAFE framework. I found the customer. It's right there. And if you're familiar with the 3 tenets of Agile, like customer should be at the core of it, right? Amazon phrases it in terms of customer obsession. Almost every successful company has this big focus on the customer, but somehow we've lost the focus on the customer with all this other stuff that is simply not necessary. So a couple of examples, and some of these are tongue-in-cheek. The chef one for sure is tongue-in-cheek, right? You'll hear the phrase, these are different memes going around there. Just rub a little DevOps on it, it'll fix everything. Sprinkle on the DevOps, I used the sprinkle terminology on the last slide. You cannot do that. That's not how it works. So speaking towards fake DevOps, there are some anti-patterns out there. So the first one is an anti-pattern, but it was actually totally normal, 15 plus years ago, and might still be normal at some of your companies. And that's where dev is over here, and operations or infrastructure or IT or whatever you want to call them is over there. And when dev gets done with something, they chuck it over a wall over to operations. That is not DevOps whatsoever. Just because you have both dev and ops in your organization does not mean you can magically just push those terms together and be like, yeah, we're totally DevOps, because we have them both. Even if you have them both in-house, if there's still a wall in between them, it's not DevOps. Then another approach that a lot of companies take, especially startups or smaller bootstrap companies, we don't need ops, right? There's actually this whole thing called no ops out there, which takes it to the extreme and says, my devs can just do ops, and therefore I don't need ops at all. Just some subset of my devs kind of know something about Linux servers, and therefore we're good, right? And no, you're not good. You do still require those skill sets, and when you grow, you'll start to feel those pains. Then the other common one that I continue to see in the market today is this separate DevOps silo. So I already have a dev org, and I have an ops org, and I just started this new team called DevOps. And this is almost where Target was heading, and I think they've corrected themselves. They started this new team, and they call it DevOps, and they'll push CI/CD, for example. So the DevOps team often becomes the tooling team. And again, DevOps is three different things, not just tooling. But when you create this separate team, that's often what they'll do, because in an effort to justify their continued existence at the company, they will just say, well, we're doing tooling, we're supporting the tooling. But that's not enough. That's not DevOps. You truly need these two organizations to work together hand in hand in terms of cross-functional teams. So I'll talk about that here in some models that actually work. So this is not fake DevOps. This is how real companies are actually applying DevOps to organizations. The reason I bring this up in this presentation is you might be asked to participate in some of these teams, either very shortly or in the near-term future, depending on what your current company is or current target company might be. So one of those is called, I like to call it the startup model, so I consider that embodied by Amazon. Then there's this product model that I've been talking about that Target has adopted. Home Depot has also adopted that. They call it the SRE model, modeled after Google. It's just the product model. A lot of people have lots of different terms. So there's this whole thing called site reliability engineering that people will then confuse with DevOps. It's a subset of DevOps. I'm not going to dive into it in this presentation. And then you have this embedded model, which is what I consider what Google to be doing with their SRE model, as well as Disney is doing that in their IT organization. So if we look at the startup model, it's characterized by this full stack engineering culture. And as you heard with Werner Vogel's, you build it, you run it. It's kind of the future that you're going to see at a lot of companies that are kind of following this model. So teams have full autonomy to choose the technology that best enables their business. And in the case of Amazon, that's many different startups essentially. So if my little startup in Amazon needs a different technology than Amazon.com to succeed, they're fully empowered to go out and use that technology, even though it's not from corporate IT. And then the financials, because of that choice, the financials are managed directly by the team, and it might have chargeback. I'm not going to go to chargeback and show back here, but it might have some kind of chargeback. In terms of like strong opinions and loosely held and all that, in this case, it is strong opinions loosely held because while corporate IT might have opinions on of course AWS is the right technology, those are loosely held. If the startup has a compelling enough business case, they can literally use whatever they want. In terms of structure, you'll see a small team, right? In the Amazon terminology, 2 pizza box teams. That's 7 plus or minus 2 engineers, and then they'll roll up to a product manager. And then there's all sorts of bureaucracy in between before you get to a CEO. And then there's some kind of central support. Here I was calling it corporate IT, but there's some kind of organization that if you so choose, you could go leverage the services of that central organization, such as ticketing systems, common infrastructure platforms, etc. In the product model, you see the lines of business actually have equal control to what would historically be called the IT organization. So when you get into this product model, you have tons and tons of Scrum teams going on. So you wind up with this Scrum of Scrums idea. So another way of phrasing that would be big room planning. The company behind the Weather Channel does big room planning, but you have to have some kind of, management of, because I have so many small teams and I'm actually contributing just towards a handful of products, you have to somehow coordinate those products, and you can't always trust the individual teams to do it for reasons. So you have all sorts of product owners here that kind of talk to that Scrum of Scrums, and then the engineers really get buried down here with this kind of, they'll have a solid management structure back to their engineering managers, at least in the case of Target. But then you have this dotted line relationship back to product owners. And so the product owners and the engineering managers are really on equal footing, and your engineers kind of have to take mixed messages from both. In an ideal situation, those two people are on the same page. As you know, in the real world, things don't always happen that way. Embedded model. This is the Google SRE model applied here. So here you'll have products, and you can think of them as horizontal slices. So you'll have developers, you do just stay in this silo of developers, and then you have this thing called DevOps or SRE or infrastructure or architecture, whatever you want to phrase it as, and they'll report to their own org. So it's really an anti-pattern to DevOps where the developers report to their org and the ops report to their org, but in the terms of an individual product, we'll at least create a cross-functional team between them. Here you have strong opinions, strongly held, because the different SREs all get together and be like, hey, we're going to do this one thing so that we can slide in between products, right? And you're like, yeah, we're going to do that. So traditional lines of reporting, just it's weird. Okay, I have about 5 minutes left here. I'm going to talk about some ideas for survival in your career, and I'm going to go pretty quickly through them so we can have a little bit of Q&A. So the first is for you to try and stay relevant in the market. Absolutely embrace the idea of lifelong learning. Otherwise, IT or development might not be the right career for you, and that's okay, right? Everybody has different career aspirations, and the only thing constant in IT is change. If your company doesn't give you exposure to what you think is the future, consider turning to side projects, with the asterisk here that it's absolutely unfair that you might have to do that. It's especially unfair to underrepresented groups. But it is the reality that if your company is not going to invest in you, you have to invest in yourself somehow. Another thing is get ready to carry the pager. It's obviously not really a pager anymore, but you'll still hear like PagerDuty is a very real company out there. They'll send it to your phone. But if you're going to support that, you build it, you run it culture. Even at 3 a.m., you, the developer, is going to get the call when we're losing revenue as a business because of the bug on our website. Absolutely encourage you all to dive into CI/CD. In the context of Drupal, that might be challenging, but we're certainly exploring at Nerdery how is CI/CD going to play with various CMSs such as Drupal, so be ready to jump into those efforts. Get comfortable with platform as a service and or containers, right? Docker's all the rage. I can go deploy Drupal in a container. Doesn't mean I want to do that in production, but I can do it, and a company will eventually ask you to please do that in production. Start thinking through now, what are those things I'm going to have to change to manage that consideration. Also would recommend you look at the developer certs for your company's favorite cloud. So I list the AWS, GCP, and Azure ones there. Definitely look into those. Also, you should demand more of your company. So don't let your company succumb to the fake Agile or fake DevOps. Your Scrum Master and Manager are there for you. They're there to block. They're there to tackle. They should be removing barriers that prevent you from doing your best work. If they're creating problems with all these ceremonies and other things, tell them. Let them know. They're not going to know unless you give them that feedback. Once your company realizes it's a digital company, the most important asset is you, the developer. You are the tip of the spear with that digital company stuff. So I'll give you an example. Software engineering professionals, as a firm in Indianapolis hires a lot from Rose-Hulman. The engineers there actually earn more than management. Like if you understand you're a digital company, like you should be the most important thing, and the company should be investing in you because there is no company without its employees. The benchmark out there is 20% time, 1 day a week for self-improvement, company improvement projects. Google does it, Target now does it. The important thing is don't let it become 120% time, right? It becomes like, oh, you still got to do your day job if you want to do the 20% time. No, right? I'm here at the company for a set amount of hours per week. Yeah, sometimes I got to go over that because I'm a salaried employee, but don't let it become regularly, 120% time. Go Google it. There's all sorts of great articles out there on how that often happens, even at Google. At least one conference a year. You're all here. Excellent. Avoid non-competes. Maintain your IP rights for side projects, especially if you know they're not investing in you. You got to be able to continue those side projects. And then, is there a formal mentorship program at your company, and could you benefit from it? Right? Target had a great mentorship program. I actually did not benefit very much from it, but Accenture also had a great mentorship program, and eventually I did benefit from it. It was difficult to navigate, but literally like a year and a half in, I did finally find a great mentor that worked out for me. Is there an articulated career ladder with clear expectations at each rung? A lot of companies, right, this is constant. As I change the titles, change the roles, change the teams, it becomes really difficult. But ask that of your employer, right? You should know what the expectations of you are. And then finally, build the future you want to see. So if your company has initiatives, interest groups, get involved with them. If you guys do the Agile stuff with the retros as part of your sprints, voice project, organizational, and people issues, not just code issues, and include specific ideas for improvement if possible. Sometimes there's just a vague feeling and something didn't go right. I get it, but if you can bring in ideas for improvement, your management's more likely to take action on it. Offer to be a mentor. Even if your company doesn't have a formal mentoring program, if you see people more junior than you on your team and your company that could benefit from your experience, share it as much as you can. High-performing teams are all about people. Corporations have all sorts of politics, grandstanding, etc. that happens. But when you find that high-performing, high-trust team, stick together, absolutely. And that might mean you guys stick together across companies. I would love to go work with the people I worked with at Sony, at Amazon, etc. But when you find them, definitely keep in touch, network, reach out to them. And finally, if you're single, unattached, without kids, that is the best time to be an entrepreneur. So feel free, as you're doing those side projects, just to improve yourself, tell people about it. And if people are like, dude, I would totally pay you for that, explore that. It might be a real consideration for you. All right, I'm at 45 minutes. Shout out that Nerdery is hiring. I can't tell you what roles, but feel free to hit our careers website or talk to Matt downstairs if he's still there. All right, any questions?